Welcome to this 20-minute tour of Windmill. Windmill is the modern open source developer platform and the fastest workflow engine to build your entire internal stack. First, we're going to start with the scripts, which is the base layer of everything in Windmill. The scripts can be triggered by the UI or through webhooks or through a schedule and through other means. Second, we'll see the flows. The flows are composed of a low-code builder to build a DAG, and every step itself is code. And then last, we'll see how to build apps for your operators to do complex operations. Windmill is open source and can be easily self-hosted. We have complete instruction in the documentation, and you can get going in a few minutes. It can also scale on your Kubernetes cluster and work with thousands of workers. So first, the scripts. The scripts are made of code in either TypeScript, Python, Go, Bash, PostgreSQL, and every of the SQL variant. The scripts are usually made of the code itself with the main entry point and the logging functions and the returns. One of the specificities of Windmill is that we let you focus on the business logic, and you never have to deal with dependencies yourself or write your own UI if you don't want to. We're going to parse all of this from the script itself by looking at the arguments, looking at the import, and then generate the log file and so on. So first, what you can see here is that by quickly changing the code, the web IDE change aspects and allow us to iterate quickly by testing back and forth. This can be also done on VS Code, but the web IDE is a very practical way of iterating quickly. So here, for instance, we'll write a script to send a Slack message. For that, we'll just use one of the Dino library to interact with Slack, but we could also have used the npm Slack library, or we could have in Bun also use Bun to write the code as we would with normal Node.js code. So here, what's important is just that we define what are our parameters, the text, the channel, the Slack. One interesting is the Slack take the resource type Slack. And what it means is that instead of being just a variable like a string, it will be a complex object that is managed by Windmill, and then we can just select. This resource can contain an OS object that we can connect using the normal OS path, and then select and let the script use the token on our behalf. What you can also see here is that Windmill integrate with AI to be able to generate the full script. This allows us to go quickly and remove a lot of the boilerplate of the code, letting us focus on the crux of the logic. Here, as you can see, that we are able to quickly deploy and then run it and be able to see the logs and the result very quickly with all the metadata. Then we can go to the runs page that we see here and see all the past executions, filter by success, failure, as they're still running, and see the length of execution of each script, and as well as at a glance see all the success and the failure. On this page, you can quickly look at the args of every job, as well as the metrics such as the memory usage, and also attempt to run it again with the exact same arguments. Second, you can also create webhooks. So for each script and flow, a webhook is automatically generated, so you don't have to do anything. And then last, you can also create a schedule very quickly by just mentioning your cron frequency, pass the parameters, and then boom, you have your schedule. In Windmill, retries and error handlers are primitives that you can very easily add on top of your existing script schedules flows. You can connect in the workspace settings your Slack, and then on every failure, it will actually just send a Slack message to the specific job that failed. So here, presently, last, we're going to see the Windmill CLI. The Windmill CLI can run scripts, but most importantly, it can allow you to do local development by using VS Code and locally and integrate with Git so that you can collaborate with your team and then synchronize by pushing and pulling at relevant time. Windmill will even do that automatically for you if you set up git sync, such that on any change to script flow and apps, it will automatically push a new commit to your repo. It can do it in a branch-based manner, such that you can have a very efficient workflow based on staging, prod, dev staging and prod. So the VS Code is something that make more sense as the team grow to use that as the primary way to edit scripts. And to that end, we have developed a VS Code extension that allow you to modify the scripts directly, and including its metadata, and have a very nice preview of that script directly in VS Code. To do that, you simply need to point VS Code to your Windmill instance, configure your token, and now you're going to be able to see the same panels that you saw on the web IDE. Using the VS Code extension is very powerful for local development because you can reuse all the power of VS Code while actually running all of your scripts directly on the remote instance configured in the VS Code extension settings and benefit from the credentials already stored there. Once you're happy with your changes, you will be able to use a CLI to push your changes directly on Windmill. In most cases, you would actually not use a CLI directly, but have your CI use that CLI and then use a feature that we'll see later called git sync that will actually deploy back to Git upon any changes made on the workspace through the UI. On more complex setups, you can have git sync actually create pull requests and merge requests upon any changes so that you can have a setup with a staging workspace, a prod workspace, and pull request to review for any changes made to the staging workspace that upon being merged to the prod branch are automatically deployed to your prod workspace and instance. In this setup, git sync will create a commit for the script we just created, and that commit will contain the script content and the metadata and the log file of that script. Next, we will see the flows. The flows are just general workflows made of individual scripts. Those scripts can be composed into complex patterns, but the simplest of them is a sequence. Every step can be coded in TypeScript, Python, SQL. Here an example of a script made in TypeScript where we are going to quickly be able to iterate and test directly. However, for most scripts, they're not independent of each other, and you will want to connect the input of one to the output of another. Alternatively, you can also connect them to the flow inputs, which are inputs either written manually in the UI by the operator or part of the payload of the webhook. In this interface, we'll be able to test the flows on different inputs and see the results immediately. Let's build a more concrete use case. Using Windmill AI, we'll generate a flow that will fetch the top 3 stories from Hacker News and create a summary for each of them and then send them to Slack. So first, we'll create a script that will fetch the top 3 stories from Hacker News. And we see that the AI created the scripts perfectly and we'll be able to test it immediately. Then we can reuse the send Slack message workspace script that we've done before to make this flow more useful by sending those top 3 stories to our Slack. Then we'll complexify the flows by adding a for loop. Again, Windmill AI will understand the context and be able to generate the iterator expressions that will iterate over all the top 3 stories. And then, again, we'll ask Windmill AI to create a new script for us that will open the stories from the URL and get us the first 300 words. This will be useful later, and we'll be able to generate a summary from by using a hub scripts, so a script made by the community and available easily in Windmill, from our OpenAI credentials and the content, generate a summary. These subscripts take a complex set of parameters including the prompt. And this prompt is actually not just a static parameter. It depends on the output of the previous steps, which we can easily do since it's a JavaScript expression, and we can simply write results.d to refer to the result of the step d. Now we're going to be able to test easily and see that everything makes sense, and by looking at the test run of the flow, look at the arguments of every step, the result of every step. The test seems to work, everything seems to make sense. So we're happy with where we are right now. Now we can edit the last steps to share the Hacker News summaries on Slack. Once we're done, we'll test that the flow works as expected. What is nice about Windmill workflows is that each individual steps is observable, its arguments, its logs, its results. Later on, we'll see that we can add more advanced primitives such as retries or caching very easily without complexifying the code. The result is not perfect, but it works. Now let's do something more complex where we don't actually want to summarize the links to blogs. So for that, we'll create a branch. A branch is a subflow or multiple subflows that only one of them will be picked up based on a predicate. Again, Windmill AI can generate those predicates so that we get the flexibility of code, but without having to necessarily write everything. When a URL contains blog, we'll just say this is yet another blog, and we'll not try to summarize it. So easily we can see that we've added more complexity on our flows without having to necessarily had too much boilerplate on the code, but just augmenting our existing flow. Now we'll test again, and we see that everything works as expected, and we have a more pleasant result. Next, we'll see another very powerful primitives of Windmill, which are approval steps, also called suspended or prompt steps. Those steps are special in the sense of like whenever they are finished, they will actually suspend the flow until the flow receives the right event. That event can be an approval in the UI, but it can also be more generally a webhook that is sent by either a Slack or from another backend system. Here, we'll want to ask approval before sending a message to the Slack channel. We'll actually do that by asking the approval on Slack itself. Approval steps are very powerful because they actually do not consume any resource. The flows can be parked forever until they receive the right event, and it doesn't actually consume any compute. In general, this is a much more powerful pattern than seen in other frameworks where the waits are active. So another thing to note about how approval steps work is that they need to send the webhooks to the recipients. This is considered to be a secret and what authorizes the approvers to have the rights to approve or not. They do not need to be Windmill users, and then can also send payload that will be reused later as part of the flow. Those forms can be as complex as needed, and the permissions can also be complexified so that only a certain subgroups within Windmill can approve the rest of the flow. We won't have time to cover all the advanced settings of the flows, but know that there are retries, caching, ability to sleep for a certain number of seconds, to mock a result so that you can iterate quickly, to use a shared directory, to stop early the flows, and other runtime settings such as concurrency limits to limit the amount of concurrency of a given step in a given time window. Once we have deployed our flow, we'll be able to run it. Next, we'll see the S3 integration of Windmill, which allow the flows to be used to create data pipelines. Under the hood, it's just using the normal workflows, but every step here is meant to interact with S3 by using the S3 integrations. The S3 integration allows to write and read easily from S3 without having to pass complex connection parameters at every step. Windmill will also be able to preview the results and of those steps, and also allow to upload very large files and only pass the reference to those files as part of the scripts, so that to write complex data pipelines, the flows will pass between each other those references, and they will read from those references and then write from them. Windmill also support workflows as code. So instead of writing your workflows as a DAG, you will write a single script that contain all the different tasks and then run that script. In this mode, we can see the details of each task easily. Enough about the flows. Now let's see the apps, the third layer of Windmill. The apps look very similar to other framework in this category, where you are able to drag and drop components, but the specificity here is that you can reuse scripts and flows already part of your workspace without having to inline everything. It's very powerful to compose scripts and flows that you've already made, but that need a more complex UI than just the form that we auto-generate from Windmill. Here you see that we created a button that we've linked to the flow that we created prior. Now let's see how we can actually link components together, because a single component is not that powerful. So the things we're going to do here is to create an inline script. So a script that is going to be specific to our app. We'll remove the flow, and next we'll add tabs. Tabs are an interesting component which have subgrids. Those subgrids can also include other components. So we'll be able to make our application more rich by having multiple panes and then allow the user to navigate between those panes without having to have everything flat. Now we're going to connect multiple components together. So the buttons that we have created previously with a script, we're going to modify its inline script and have some logic that will connect to the text inputs that we've just created, so that every time we click on the button, it's going to take as parameter what is in the text input. We're also going to be able to test things in the preview mode, which is going to be closer to the final result that our users are going to be able to see. We press the button and see the expected results. Next, we'll see tables. Tables are an extremely powerful component, and to some extent, most apps are glorified spreadsheets. So for this table in particular, we'll inline an SQL script that will connect to our Postgres database. We'll write a simple query after having created the resource and store the proper credentials so that it can be used directly as an SQL script. We're going to just write a single statement, but we could have made that statement depend on other parameters of the app. Next, we'll do something very powerful, which is create an action, which is a way to have a button next to every row. That button can also contain another script, and that script will generate with Windmill AI. In particular here, we'll basically want the button to set a value for that particular row to be banned. For this to work, we need this particular script to take as input the email contained in the row. And so we see here that, like in other cases, it is sufficient to connect it to the input. Tables are a bit special in the sense of like they have very dynamic outputs such as selected rows and inputs. We'll change the label, make it red because this is a dangerous action, and then we're done with what we wanted to achieve. Last but not least, we'll say that we want to retrigger the compute of the table as soon as the action is complete. Now we test it. When we press the button, the field is changed and the table is recomputed. It works perfectly. Raw information is not the only information you can use in those buttons. You can use contextual information such as context variables that depend on the viewer that is currently viewing this particular app. You can also change the theme of any components and of the app itself to make it fit more your style or your particular wants for this particular component. You can then make those CSS settings a theme that you can reuse and make defaults for every other apps within your workspace. You can see here that we have excellent taste and we will want this particular theme to be shared across every apps. The CSS editor contains a list of all classes from all components that you can edit to customize the theming experience. This was a simple app, but you can build way more complex apps in Windmill, which are extremely performant and efficient and pleasant to use. Here we see an example of an app using a very powerful component called the Database Studio. The Database Studio just needs to be linked to a table in your database and then will automatically create a component that has an efficient way to list all of the rows, to create an automatic form to insert element in that table and allow to do quick search. This is it. We hope you appreciated this quick tour of Windmill. Thanks for your time and see you soon on Windmill.